Welcome, everyone, and I'm very glad that you could join us today. My name is Megan Poole, and I'm the Central Regional Coordinator of the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I will be the host and the question moderator for today's webinar, which is Preparing for Tomorrow, the Benefits of Future Thinking in Libraries. And our presenter today is Annie Gaines, who is the Continuing Education Consultant for the Idaho Commission for Libraries, and where she connects the people who work in all types of libraries to provide training and support to reach their future goals. She has experience working in academic and public libraries. Her very first job was a teenage library page in her local public library, and I love that so much. And has earned certificates in strategic foresight, facilitation, and instructional design. We are so happy that she's here today. After this webinar has been transcribed, it will be available on the Indiana State Library's archived webinars page. If you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU is in the video's description in YouTube. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to the Indiana State Library's e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word, and check out our continuing education website for other professional development opportunities. So let's get started. Thank you so much for being with us today, Annie. I'll hand the presentation over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see all the folks from Indiana and also other states in the chat. So as Megan said, my name's Annie Gaines. I'm the continuing education consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, which is the state agency in Idaho that supports libraries across the state. And we're here today to talk about the future, and hopefully not in a stressful way. Um, so I am a co-lead of a group in Idaho called SPLAT, and I will be talking a little bit more in this presentation about what SPLAT is, how it came to be, and what it does. But I wanted to give you an overview of who is in SPLAT. So typically, SPLAT is led by two consultants at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. Previously, a few months ago, my co-lead was Dina Brown. So you might hear me mention Dina a few times in this presentation. And currently her position is filled by Jennifer Redford, who is our youth services consultant, also a great sort of futurist to talk to. And then we lead a group of 10 library staff from across the state. From different libraries. We hope to have representation from all different types and sizes of libraries. So we've got smaller libraries, larger library systems, an academic library, and also someone from a health sciences library at a hospital. So those are our SPLAT members. Before we get going, I wanted to jump in a little bit to play a game. So this is a game called The Thing from the Future. It was created by an organization called Situation Lab, and they released it with a Creative Commons license, meaning that anybody can use it and repurpose it in whatever way they would like. It's effectively a card game, but we're gonna try to do a version of a card game in a virtual setting, which is always interesting. So it's a game, we call it a participatory design game, where the people who are playing it are working together to design different objects or things from the future, working with different scenarios of the future. And it is a way of, it is play. We are playing, but it's also kind of serious play, and that we're engaging with uh, sometimes a difficult topic to think about, like the future can be scary. So we like to play around a little bit with games like this to help it feel a little bit less so. So I'm going to run through an example. So in the game, there are 4 different types of cards. that relate to different things, different aspects of this thing from the future. There is the arc card, which tells you sort of the type of future that you're looking at. There's the object card, which tells you what this object is, this thing. The terrain, which is kind of like it's what it has to do with, its category, its features. And then the mood card, which tells you the sort of emotion or feeling that that thing from the future produces. And we like to put these together in a sentence, sort of like a Mad Libs kind of a thing. So, in a future society characterized by collapse, where society as we know it has kind of come apart, there exists a festival having to do with fashion that produces curiosity. Um, and when I think about what this thing from the future might be, this fashion festival in a collapsed society, I am reminded of a book and a TV show called Station 11, where there was a devastating pandemic that wiped out, I think, like 99% of the population. And several years in the future, you meet this traveling troupe of theater performers who are traveling across the wastelands and putting on plays and performances for the people, like Shakespeare, things like that, to sort of introduce people and remind them of some of the great art that existed in the before times. So this fashion festival could be kind of like that, but instead of focused on the theater and the performance, they could be doing sort of like a traveling fashion show where they bring out examples of fashion pieces from the past and also maybe teaching people how to make their own clothing or how to dye their own clothing and repair and mend. Um, that's kind of what I think of when I think about this thing from the future. So that's kind of how it works. Now it's going to be your turn. So I want you in the chat to think about what this thing might be and give it a little bit of a description, like one sentence. So I'm gonna speak it out like I did before. So in a future society characterized by growth, where progress has continued, there exists a monument having to do with shopping that produces excitement. So in the chat, if you could uh, give an example or a description of what you think this thing from the future might be. I'd be curious to know what you're thinking about. Also, bonus points if you could connect it to libraries in some way. It's giving Amazon Overlord a bit, which I, kind of agree. The only remaining place to buy books to connect to libraries. That makes sense. Yeah. In a future that's really where sort of the existing kind of progress has continued forward. Um, RIP Baker and Taylor for sure, for sure. Pour one out for Baker and Taylor. Um, an AI kiosk that's a personal shopper of sorts, selecting and recommending books. Ooh, that's interesting. I like that. A library special collection with mannequins from early 20th century to late 21st century. That could be interesting. An interactive display where you are the monument. Ooh, you pick the book you want to dress like and can buy the outfit based on what it dresses you like. Ooh, I love that. Ooh, so like you pick up The Great Gatsby and it gives you like a 1920s flapper outfit, and you could be like, "Yeah, I like this," and then you walk out of the store with it. Ooh, that's fun. Maybe it could be a way for people to pretend capitalism from the past. Like maybe everyone's needs are met now, so they go here to LARP the shopping experience from years ago. Ooh, I like that. Sort of like the Star Trek universe where everyone's needs are met and so they get to do fun things. Libraries host a monthly indoor market where local artists and other entrepreneurs can display the items and services they have for sale. That's very good. That's a very practical idea. I like that. So you can kind of see how like this started out a little silly. Um, but then because we are library people, because we are constantly thinking about ways to make our libraries better for the people that we serve, we started thinking about like, oh, like how could this actually be a useful program for the library people that we serve? Um, a carousel ride of clothing items, since it's a festival, that displays imagery of fashion history. Ooh, a carousel ride. Ooh, that could be fun. Like it's a small world of shopping and clothing. That's very cool. Nice. Excellent ideas, everybody. So, hold on to this like idea of fun thinking about the future, play stuff, because we're going to come back to it in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Splat. So, I mentioned that Splat is this organization that I'm a co-lead for. Um, and in the chat, I'd be curious what you think SPLAT stands for. We love acronyms in the library world. SPLAT is an acronym. Ooh, Splat the cat. That's a good one. Doesn't stand for the cat, unfortunately. But yeah, so any ideas what SPLAT might stand for? Super public librarians and teachers. That is a good one. I like that. I like the super of like da, da, da. Special Projects Library Action Team. That's it. Special libraries are terrific. That is true. So Yvette called it. It is the Special Projects Library Action Team. Um, it's a very fun sequence of words to say. So SPLAT, the Special Projects Library Action Team, was an outcome of a visioning session thinking about 2020 that was held back in 2005. And it was officially formed in 2006. So this year, 2026, is Splat's 20th birthday year. And the intention of Splat, this organization, was to sort of be the eyes and ears on the ground for the Commission for Libraries, to sort of be scanning at a high level and then sort of report back to us at the commission so that that could help inform the things that we do. Um, they're a group that meets pretty regularly, but is flexible about it. Right now, we're meeting once a month virtually, and ideally, we meet once a year in person for like a 2-day in-person meeting. Um, again, like talking about that sort of high up perspective instead of getting down into the weeds of um, those nitty-gritty details to kind of see the trends, to be agents of change, not only in their libraries, but also at the state level to sort of prototype different ideas and promote them to the state. Um, the Splat members apply through an application process to be a part of the Splat team. And they serve 3-year terms, which they can They can do that 2 years in a row, so they can serve 6 years at a time. And currently, our main way that we communicate out what we talk about in Splat is we have a newsletter that goes out every other week called the Curiosity Report. So in the early days of Splat, in those first few years, it was we built these self-paced 6-week online courses that talked about internet technologies. Um, so asking people to create a blog, edit a Wikipedia post, and add titles in library thing. Over 100 people completed at least 5 of the 6 topics and earned a certificate of achievement. So that was sort of covering that like Web 2.0 kind of topics. Next, Splat focused on gizmos, like technology, borrowable kits of e-readers and tablets to help introduce that technology to library staff across the state, especially in the rural areas of the state. Um, they also developed different ideas of how to incorporate that new technology into library programming. And Splat members at this time did a lot of um, basically professional development for other library staff, where they would go to a library with a kit full of e-readers and different tools and teach the library staff how to use it, which worked pretty well in terms of that peer-to-peer learning was pretty effective. Next up, there was a good chunk of time where Splat went out into the state to do these summer road trip adventures, where they would travel to different parts of the state to do face-to-face outreach at 44 different libraries. So the different colors of the pins on this map show, so like all of the orange ones were done in one summer, all the red ones were done in one summer, all the green ones were done in one summer. Because Idaho, it's a big-ish state, and it can be especially difficult to traverse some areas. There's a lot of mountains, a lot of mountain passes, and the north part of the state and the south part of the state are not easy to cross. Um, so that was a very time intensive but very fun activity for Splat members to sort of travel around and be really doing a lot of that peer-to-peer learning, not only with library staff, but also putting on programs at libraries, which worked pretty well. Then, sort of concurrently, but then the next thing was branching out from the borrowable kits of e-readers to borrowable kits of robots and circuit tools and 3D printers and other various sort of STEM activities. Um, Sort of really focusing on those emerging technologies. 3D printers were getting really trendy at this time, and there was a pretty high learning curve to learning about how 3D printers worked. And so taking them out to show people how they worked and then offering these kits for people to borrow was pretty successful for Splat. After that, Splat focused on emerging trends. Um, so instead of focusing on specific technologies, they because they started to change so quickly and so rapidly, really thinking about the trends themselves and the skills that library staff would need that they could apply to really any technology that comes into the library or any sort of current library issue. Um, and so Splat started to be Splat was committed to helping libraries continue to be on the front lines of various changes that were coming, um, and recognizing the future trends that might come into the library and impact them, which leads us to when we started really focusing on thinking about the future in a strategic way. So, when we talk about futures thinking, um, it's really, we think of it as both a theory of how to think about the future, a mindset that you're bringing to your strategic thinking about the future, and various processes that you put in place to help sort of structure that thinking about the future. Um, there is a professional association for futurists. A lot of large corporations might have somebody on staff who is a professional futurist, where their job is to sort of scan um, the trends and predict what might happen and might impact that company going forward. Um, it's important to know, though, that futures thinking, when we're scanning, when we're predicting, we're not actually making firm predictions. Like, we don't actually know for sure what's going to happen. We're leaning into that acceptance of things are uncertain. Um, there are multiple possible futures that are before us. And so getting comfortable with that uncertainty is important. What we're what we do a lot as when we think about the future is we tell stories about what the future might be. Um, and those stories are not just, a fun ride in our brain, but rooted in facts, things that we know for sure, um, facts about what's happening currently and what has happened in the past to help sort of guide those stories that we tell about the future. And they have found that the practice of thinking strategically about the future in this way helps develop 7 key strengths. So, through the process of stretching those future thinking muscles by thinking strategically about it, you'll build these 7 key strengths. So, and those are creativity, foresight, mental flexibility, empathy, practical skepticism, strategy, and hope. So when we talk about creativity, we're not saying like you will become a better painter. Um, we mean that you're able to move past some of those ideas of what is traditional or what has happened before to invent new possibilities. You're able to imagine things that don't exist today or maybe have never existed before. With foresight, you're able to anticipate possibilities that others can't or maybe won't see, which allows you to see the future that's coming so that you won't be blindsided by it. You have some idea of what might be coming, which helps sort of inoculate you against the fear and help you feel more prepared. With mental flexibility, you're able to accept that things can be different than they are now, and that virtually anything could change. And this mental flexibility mind state is really the opposite of having a fixed or a stuck mindset. With empathy, that's a great strength to have in general. Um, you're able to be keenly aware of the hopes and fears of others, paying attention to how any future that you're thinking about could affect different groups of people and communities differently, which allows you to work for or strive for sustainable futures that benefit everybody. Um, and I think this is especially useful in the library world when we're trying to support everybody in our community. With practical skepticism, you're able to apply critical thinking skills to claims about what's possible or likely to happen in the future, um, which means that you don't necessarily buy into the hype that others are selling you because you will have a clear sense of what's realistic and possible in the future. With strategy, you're able to get better at setting clear goals, choosing a course of action, and connecting the dots from the present moment to your preferred future. And with hope, you're able to be confident that the actions that you take today can potentially make a big impact on how your future and the futures of others will turn out. And these positive impacts from gaining these strengths and thinking strategically about the future have been studied and documented in the scientific literature. So I'm not just saying it. It is a real thing. So one of the important concepts as we do futures thinking, as we think strategically about the future, is the knowledge that there are these multiple different futures that are possible. And one way that is useful to visualize that concept is with what's called the cone of plausibility. And we have visually transformed that into like a flashlight. So um, imagine that you are standing in a dark room or maybe a dark forest, and you don't know what's in that space. It could be dangerous or it could be completely safe. And when we're thinking about the future, it can feel really similar. Like we have no idea what it holds at first, but we can try to see into it using the tools that we have available to us. So the flashlight is a tool that we can use to illuminate the room or the forest to see what's ahead of us. The brighter and wider the flashlight's beam of light, the more we can see and the safer we'll feel. And if we see something scary in front of us, we can prepare for it. But there are limits to our tools, as our flashlight beam can only go so far, and it often gets weaker and fuzzier on the edges. So, and we think this flashlight metaphor is a really useful way to talk about this conoplausibility, um, where there are these multiple types of futures that branch outward from this present moment in time. So the edges of the cone, like the edges of our flashlight's beam, show the limits of what's possible as we move forward in time. The center of the flashlight beam is what's clearest and brightest, which illuminates the most probable, what's most likely to happen, or projected future. If the way things are now just sort of continue into the future with little to no changes. Moving outward from the center of that beam, the light is less bright, less clear, and we have futures that are plausible, things that could happen, and possible, which are things that might happen. And then on the very edges of the cone, we have what's preposterous, futures that are fantastic or nearly impossible, like a zombie apocalypse, human teleportation, or contact with aliens from outer space. There's also a future here that's preferable, which is um, you can think of that from the perspective of you as an individual, or from the perspective of an organization. So this preferable future is the one that you want to happen or that you believe should happen. And it can be sort of all across the spectrum here, because maybe I really want to make contact with aliens from outer space, um, which is a preposterous future. Um, but I also maybe want something that's more in the probable zone. So when we engage in this process of thinking strategically about what the future could be and the kind of future we want, we improve our ability to focus our gaze on a vision of our preferable future and using that vision to guide us in the choices that we make to get there, either individually or as an organization. Okay, sort of stepping back again to talk a little bit more about Splat and our focus on the future. So in 2019, the Idaho Commission for Libraries held a Futures Camp. It was a in-person conference at a local college, the College of Idaho, where attendees stayed in the dorms. It was very exciting. And it was 3 days of thinking about the future, um, not just for yourself or your library, but for Idaho sort of as a whole, um, which was a very exciting event. We had some great keynote speakers. One of those keynote speakers mentioned the Futures Festival, which is an annual-ish volunteer-run festival to share ideas and things that people learned, which is hosted by the Association of Professional Futurists. So at that conference, Dina met Dr. Peter Bishop, who is a futurist. He's been a college professor teaching on this topic, and he has an organization called Teach the Future, which is focused on incorporating these ideas of thinking about the future for K-12 students. So they have a lot of resources focused on supporting teachers in K-12 schools as they try to teach these things. So Dina invited Dr. Peter Bishop to attend a in-person Splat meeting in January of 2020, where he talked about futures thinking and he introduced their futures thinking playbook, which is a physical book that is full of, they call them plays. So they're really playful activities that are great for young people, but also we've used them with adults to help them think about the future and sort of brainstorm a little bit. So at that in-person meeting in January of 2020, Dr. Peter Bishop did this activity where he had folks think about um, what is sort of a given thing with libraries? Like what is the normal expectation of a library? In that the Splat folks said um, that there are people in the community that come to the library to use its resources. Like that is sort of the expectation. Um, not really questioned. Um, but the funny thing about, and then he asked this question, he flipped it of, you know, let's imagine that thing that you think is so unchangeable and to be expected, what if that's not possible anymore? And so he asked, how does a library that doesn't have people in it continue to serve the community? So there's no staff physically in the library, and there's no community members coming to the library to use those resources. He asked them, what does that look like? Um, and it was an interesting thought exercise at the time. Um, but you may remember this is January of 2020. Um, and so just a couple months later, um, the Splat members had to make this a reality because their libraries were physically closed to the public, and oftentimes they weren't allowed to work in the buildings, and they still needed to find ways to serve their community without those things that they had thought were um, so expected, so normal. Um, and the SPLAT members said that going through this activity of imagining what that would be like, even though it seemed really preposterous at the time, helped them feel more prepared when it actually came to pass. Um, so it kind of inoculated them against that fear and that lack of action. So after that, Dina and I, we went through a professional certificate program in strategic foresight offered by the University of Houston. They have an online version of this, and they have um, an in-person version as well down in Texas. It's a great program. It just because of the folks that are most often doing this work. Dina and I were really the only people in that cohort that weren't part of a corporation, that weren't thinking about like a business perspective. We were thinking about a community perspective, which was interesting and still really valuable, but something to think about. And then after that, Dina and I and the Splat team put together our first Futures Thinking Toolkit. So this was a toolkit that we shared out for to help libraries think about how they could incorporate futures thinking into their library work. Um, so with the focus on working with teens, um, displays in the library that could relate to the future, and also professional development. So this was published in 2023. Once we started during that process of developing that toolkit, we learned about another sort of game play activity created by the Situation Lab, who were the same people that created that card game we did at the beginning, called the Futures Bazaar. And the Futures Bazaar was another participatory design game experience where attendees would, in teams, they would imagine a future of a specific type, and then they would create objects, prototype those objects from a mass of things, of stuff that they had available, and then they would set up like a stand to sort of sell that thing that they created, that they could barter with other folks, this thing from the future. And it was such an interesting idea. And Dina and I really wanted to find a way to make that more library focused because the idea of moving past just imagining that thing from the future to like building the thing from the future sounded super, super fun. But we didn't really want to get into the like buying and selling and trading and bartering thing because that's not quite what libraries do. So we did a few different iterations of trying to fine tune what this event could be like. We hosted, I think, 3 different versions as we were figuring it out as we went. So one of the first times, I think maybe it was the second time, we hosted a version of this as a pre-conference at our state library association conference. So that's that middle picture there with a team They created, in their future, they created a rewilding humanitarian library. And they had some different objects that they were offering there. And then in 2024, we also hosted a staff day, like an in-service staff day event with 100 staff from the largest library district in the state. So that picture on the right there is in a haunted future. The library provides a service relating to imagination that makes people feel gratitude. And they created these are artificially created ghosts that have been let loose in the public. And what the library does is it catches the ghosts, finds their knowledge base, and then checks them out to patrons for oral history presentations. So they are learning from the past to prepare from the future. So we published another toolkit, the Things from Future Libraries toolkit, which provides everything that anyone would need in order to put on one of these Things from Future Libraries workshops. It has helpful tips for planning the event, a facilitation guide, and speaker's notes, as well as some of our sources if folks would like to seek out additional information. There are handouts ready to print and a slide deck that facilitators can use to walk through all the different stages of the event. So this toolkit, as well as our previous one, is available on our website. And I'll put a link in the chat once I finish with this presentation.
Yes. Real quick, Melissa Hunt asked, how can we get or order a copy of the Futures Thinking Toolkit? Will that be part of that link that you'll share?
Yep. Yeah, it's
Okay.
freely available on our website. So once I finish the slides, because I can't get to my browser window right now, I will add that into the chat. So you can get both of those. So we've heard from a few different folks of how they're using these toolkits, which is really exciting. Some states are holding future sessions at their state library conferences. Um, some are using the toolkits to sort of guide discussions in libraries about changes that may happen with staffing levels. We used it during staff days at two of our largest library systems. And Maryland held a futuring day for the public at a public library. And I think their library association also hosted a version of this workshop as well, which is very exciting. I might be running out of time, so I'm going to run through this kind of quickly. Um, so one of the things that is important in thinking about the future is thinking about the past. That might seem a little weird, but it is important. And so there's forecasting and there's backcasting. And so this is an activity that you can do sort of internally to think about sort of where you're trying to go and also looking back at what has happened before. So the idea is you're thinking about maybe something that you're struggling with right now, personally or at work or professionally. And you're thinking about where you are right now. And then how do you feel about that struggle? I mean, is it like a relatively minor struggle, or is it like a super bad, everything is on fire, I can't function, this is bad kind of struggle? So kind of taking note of that. And then as you think about that struggle, think about how you felt about this same thing previously. That could be a year or two ago, it could be 5 years ago. It could be last month. So, like, what was it like before? Has the struggle always been happening? Is this a new struggle? Has it changed its shape or its color? Then you're gonna jump forward and this is not fun, um, but thinking about that struggle and the thing that's happening, what is the worst possible future that could happen as it relates to this struggle? So, like, I'm struggling with sort of lack of appreciation for libraries and limited funding um, at the state level. So the worst possible future is maybe like there is no funding. Um, they've they've decided that tax money should not go to libraries. Full stop. That's a pretty bad future. Then switching gears, what is the best possible future that could happen as it relates to the struggle? So if it's the same thing where, I'm worried about funding and support for libraries, maybe the best future is a librarian, a former librarian, is elected governor of the state and um, puts in place all of these different laws and guidelines to protect libraries and fund them. And there's like a statewide holiday that is just focused on celebrating and appreciating libraries throughout the community. I would love that. I would love that future. So then, as you're thinking about that beautiful butterflies and unicorns, the best possible future, what is the last piece of that puzzle that would need to happen before that thing could take place? Is it so if it's a librarian was elected governor, maybe that's the last piece of um they they were successfully elected. So they had enough votes, they had a successful campaign. Um Maybe they had a great volunteer base to work to support them. Um and yeah, I think that could be a good last piece in the puzzle. So then you sort of step back to this present moment and you think about what is the first step that I can take from here that could get me towards that possible best future that I want. Um, so maybe in this scenario, that's talking to different recently retired librarians to say, hey, have you considered running for office? Um, Starting that kind of conversation with them um, could be a first step. So then, uh, you can kind of think back about how you feel about that struggle. Um, are you feeling a little bit better now that you've kind of sorted through what it might be like? Or is it still really bad? Both are valid. That's okay. So the impact, the intention behind this activity um, is that when you're thinking about where you are now, you're grounding yourself in the present moment, which is relatively comfortable because you know what it is. You know where you are now. You know how things are now. When you think back to how things were before, that's a way to remind yourself that you've gone through tough times before, tough changes before. There have been a lot of changes in the library world, especially with technology. So remembering that like we've gone through hard things before, we could do it again. Imagining that worst possible future is a way to address those fears and name them to kind of inoculate yourself against the worst possible impact of that future. when you're thinking about the best thing that could happen, um, imagining those futures helps to sort of internalize them in your brain, and they become more real and more possible to you once you've done that work of imagining them. That thinking about that last piece, that last step that would need to happen before that future takes place, helps you kind of think about that tipping point moment of like how it could happen right there. And then when we think about that next step that we're going to take to make sure that it happens or to try to see that it happens, that's a great reminder that this progress that we take as we move towards our desired future will happen one step at a time. So that's kind of the intention behind this forecasting backcasting exercise. Um, so finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact that doing this kind of futures work has had in my life, because it's been very impactful. Um, so I definitely have felt um, I've gained this awareness that I am the driving force in my life. I'm not a passive participant in what happens to me, but an active agent of change in my own life, which means that I have the ability to create the change that I want in my life. So that's increasing agency, um, increased mental flexibility. So I like to say that we've been swimming in uncertainty soup for a while. And that has been really, really hard some days. And a really natural feeling with uncertainty is that it can make us want to control and manage and hold tighter to the things that we're afraid of losing. But what's helped me is by leaning into flexibility. So instead of fighting against the current, grabbing desperately onto the side of the river um, as it's trying to push me down, um, to sort of try to maintain what was, I can let go and move into the river, to see what happens and adapting to whatever comes up with the confidence that I can do hard things and it'll be okay. I've definitely felt an increase of practical skepticism where I'm less likely to buy into the hype of anything. And generative AI is a great example of this, where I'm very practically skeptical about that. Um, And also, I'm constantly struggling to hold on to hope over despair. I want to have hope that a better world is possible, and most of the time I do. Um, Despair is a very powerful force because it tells us a complete story that everything sucks, everyone sucks, and there's nothing that we can do about it. But that story isn't true, even if my brain wants me to believe that it's true. Um, I'm very much a fan of John and Hank Green, and they have talked quite a bit about hope, especially lately, and that has been really helpful for me. Um, and then what I'm doing with my uh, increased skills, um, I I'm doing a lot of mending of clothing because it's a great reminder to me that broken things can be repaired. I'm doing a lot of crafting. Um, it's a great reminder that we can create joy for ourselves and others using really simple tools. And I'm trying to make art because making art gives the pain in our bodies somewhere else to live outside of us. Um, and that is very important for everybody. And I just have a few resource recommendations. So, the Futures Thinking Playbook is that book of play activities related to futures thinking, geared towards teens and young adults, but great for adults too. Emergent Strategy Shaping Change, Shaping Worlds is an excellent book that talks about the future, but also brings in all of these ideas of looking at natural systems and how nature is very good at adapting and how we can learn from that. Parable of the Sower is an excellent novel that talks about the future. Um, Super inspiring. Perseverance by Margaret Wheatley has been a really essential book for me. It's a lot of futuresy things, but then just great advice and um, guidance for persevering through uncertainty and difficult times. Imaginable: How to See the Future Coming and Feel Ready for Anything is a book by Jane McGonigal. Jane McGonigal is also a proponent of play, so she does a lot of games as it relates to the future. She also helped create the Ready, Set, Future course from the Institute for the Future on Coursera. And there are more resources on our website. I will link that later on in a couple minutes on our website, um, just to cite some of our sources here. The Futures Bazaar, the Thing from the Future game, were created by Situation Lab, and we've really relied on the Futures Thinking Playbook, which was published by Teach the Future. So that is the end of my slide deck. If you want to chat with me, my email is there. And I would love to chat with you about futures thinking or splats or any other topics. That would be great. I'm pulling up the link now that I can share with you. Okay. And thank you everybody for being here. Sorry it took a little bit longer. um, but it's been great to be here.
Thank you so much, Annie, for presenting today and for everyone being here. I just, I loved this presentation when I first heard it from you, Annie. It really changed my outlook, not just the outlook of how I perceive the libraries in the future, but for myself personally. And I hope everyone received something today from your presentation. Before we leave, just as a reminder, if you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU will be in the video's description in YouTube. I will also send the LEUs out as soon as possible, hopefully next week. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day and to take care. Thank you
Thanks,
again,
Megan.
Annie.
Yeah, thanks for having me.